Have you wondered how thin the line is between family and exploitation? The hardest slap comes from empty chairs on your most important day. Yet, silence is crueler than abandonment. A silence lasting 6 months gave me time to forge myself into a weapon and shatter their empire of lies. Sit down, because my story is no tearful tragedy, but a ruthless game that will leave you breathless. Welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. As you may know, YouTube recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us with absolutely no budget to keep operating. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can provide our hardworking staff with the means to cover their living expenses and continue creating high-quality stories for you. You can easily support our channel by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the description box and the pinned comment below this video. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for keeping our stories alive. My name is Noelle Montgomery. I am 26 years old, and I was sitting completely alone in the grand, echoing auditorium of a prestigious university in Boston. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood, nervous sweat, and the overwhelming perfume of hundreds of proud families. I was wearing the heavy, suffocating black velvet gown that signified my graduation, waiting to receive my Master of Urban Planning degree. But my eyes were not on the stage or the distinguished speakers. My gaze was violently anchored to the VIP section in the front row. There, amid a sea of cheering, tearful parents holding up cameras, sat 3 painfully empty chairs. Those seats were meant for my family. I had saved up for months, working double shifts just to afford those premium tickets, desperately hoping that this massive milestone would finally make them look at me with an ounce of pride. The emptiness of those chairs felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, restricting my breathing. Just a few hours earlier, my mother had called me. Her voice had trembled over the phone, laced with what sounded like genuine panic and profound regret. She claimed their car had completely broken down on the side of the highway. She apologized over and over, swearing that they were waiting for a tow truck in the freezing cold and were absolutely devastated that they were going to miss my big moment. I had believed her completely. I had even felt a pang of guilt for being frustrated, worrying about their safety on the dangerous roads. But the universe has a remarkably cruel sense of humor. The very second the dean leaned into the microphone and called out the name, Noelle Montgomery, my phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. It was an Instagram notification. As I walked toward the stage, my heart pounding, I discreetly glanced at the illuminated screen. The air was instantly sucked out of my lungs. My mother had just started a live video broadcast. They were not shivering on the side of a highway waiting for a tow truck. They were in a glittering, obscenely lavish hotel ballroom in New York. The screen showed my parents dressed in designer clothes, raising crystal champagne glasses, laughing uproariously as they celebrated the extravagant engagement party of my older brother, Carter. The dark, suffocating truth of my existence was laid bare in that glowing little rectangle. It all made a twisted kind of sense. Carter had always been the blinding sun of our family solar system, and I was nothing more than a cold, forgotten rock orbiting in the dark. Growing up, every reckless mistake Carter ever made was quietly swept away by my parents using their hard-earned savings. When he crashed his expensive cars, when he dropped out of 2 different universities, when his foolish business ventures collapsed, they simply opened their wallets wider to protect him. Meanwhile, I was drowning under a mountain of student loan debt amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for my tuition and keep a miserable roof over my head. I worked grueling jobs for 80 hours a week. I spent my nights hunched over drafting tables until my vision blurred and my fingers cramped, surviving on cheap black coffee and sheer, desperate willpower. I never asked them for a single dime. I only asked for their presence. The ceremony eventually ended in a chaotic blur of noise and color. I walked out of the auditorium clutching a heavy leather folder that represented years of blood and agonizing sacrifices, greeted only by the polite, meaningless applause of strangers. When I stepped out into the crisp Boston afternoon air, I watched my classmates fall into the warm, crying embraces of their proud families. Nobody was looking for me. The isolation was absolute, but then a frail figure stepped out from the bustling crowd. It was my elderly landlady, a woman who had witnessed every miserable phase of my struggle. She handed me a small, slightly bruised bouquet of yellow daisies. She was the only person on earth who knew about the endless nights I paced the floorboards, the only one who had seen me quietly weeping over failing software and impossible architectural deadlines. My own blood relatives had chosen crystal champagne and lies in New York, while a stranger brought me flowers in Boston. The suffocating pressure in my chest demanded a final resolution. I needed to hear the truth from her own mouth. I dialed my mother's number one last time. She answered on the fourth ring. Through the speaker, the heavy, thumping bass of luxury club music aggressively invaded the quiet street where I stood. "What is it, Noelle?" her voice snapped, laced with sharp, undeniable impatience rather than an ounce of guilt. I asked her why she lied about the broken car. She let out a loud, exasperated sigh that cut deeper than any scream. "Carter needs our support right now to raise capital from his new wife's wealthy family," she yelled over the deafening music. "You are grown up and can take care of yourself. Do not be so selfish today." The line went dead with a sharp click. That casual, impatient dismissal was the final, lethal blade that severed the frayed cord of hope I had foolishly clung to for my entire life. I did not shed a single tear. The sorrow simply drained out of my body, leaving behind a vast, freezing emptiness. In that chilling, absolute silence, the fragile, hopeful daughter completely died, and something much harder, much sharper, took her place. I did not mourn. Mourning requires a heart that still beats for the people it lost. Instead, I meticulously packed up my fragile emotions and locked them in a heavy steel vault in my mind. The very next morning, I established an absolute, impenetrable boundary between my existence and my bloodline. I broke the lease on my old apartment, packed my few miserable belongings into heavy plastic garbage bags, and moved to a tiny windowless studio on the industrial outskirts of the city. I walked into a mobile carrier store, tossed my old SIM card into the trash can, and bought a brand new phone number. From that specific day onward, I poured 200% of my life force into my career. Sleep became a pathetic luxury I willingly traded for a razor-sharp edge. The hurt was completely eradicated, replaced by a cold, calculating machine that only understood ambition and survival. That manic, borderline psychotic obsession was exactly what I needed to survive the brutal meat grinder of the American corporate structure. I channeled every single ounce of my isolation into preparing for the most ruthless job market on the East Coast. I tore through 7 rounds of grueling technical interviews, crushing thousands of Ivy League applicants with my unyielding grit and flawless architectural portfolios. My sole target was Vanguard Horizon Associates. They were a faceless, shadowy empire to the general public, but within the real estate industry, they were an absolute leviathan. They were a predatory corporate giant that quietly acquired distressed properties and dominated massive urban planning projects. Vanguard did not care about your warm background or your prestigious family name. They only cared if you could draw blood in a corporate negotiation and design city blocks that printed money. I fit into their ecosystem perfectly. The silence from my past lasted exactly 2 months. I was sitting at my sleek glass desk on the 40th floor when a sharp notification pinged on my private corporate email. They had managed to hunt down my professional contact information through the public company directory. When I opened the message, there was absolutely no greeting. There was no desperate inquiry about my health or my sudden, mysterious disappearance. It was just a forwarded legal document from my father, aggressively demanding that I sign my name as a financial guarantor for a commercial bridge loan for Carter. He needed quick capital for a new venture, and his credit was apparently too ruined to secure it alone. They fully expected me to risk my pristine financial record and shoulder a massive debt just to fund his endless delusions. I did not feel a single spike of anger. I felt nothing but a clinical, detached disgust. I hit the reply button, typed exactly one single word, and pressed send. No. Less than 30 minutes later, the red indicator light on my office phone began blinking frantically. My mother had bypassed the front desk and left a direct voicemail on my private extension. I pressed the speaker button. Her voice instantly filled the sterile, quiet space of my office, dripping with absolute venom and unchecked rage. "You are an ungrateful, selfish little wretch," she hissed through the digital speaker. "After everything this family has done to raise you, you refuse to sign a simple piece of paper to help your own brother when he needs you most. You mark my words right now. That useless degree of yours will never help you hold your head up in the real world. You are going to fail miserably, and you will have absolutely no one to turn to when you fall." I listened to the entire toxic recording from start to finish without blinking a single time. My pulse did not elevate even a fraction. My hands remained perfectly steady on the glass surface. Her venomous words simply bounced off the titanium walls I had successfully built around my psyche. As her screeching voice echoed and finally died out in the room, my eyes dropped to the heavy parchment paper resting perfectly aligned on my desk. It was a finalized executive contract, while my mother screamed about my impending failure. I picked up my heavy silver fountain pen. I smoothly signed my name on the dotted line, officially accepting the position of chief architect for Vanguard's newest urban restructuring project, a massive corporate initiative valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. The black ink dried quickly. I permanently deleted the voicemail, closed the leather folder, and went back to work. While I was quietly orchestrating multi-million-dollar acquisitions behind the tinted glass of Vanguard Horizon, my brother was busy building a spectacular empire out of dry sand. Carter, drunk on his own unearned confidence, had successfully convinced his new wife's wealthy family to hand over a massive chunk of their fortune. But that was not enough for his monumental ego. He also drained every single cent of my parents' hard-earned retirement fund, money they had spent 40 years saving. He poured all that capital into developing a sprawling, hyper-luxurious resort complex in one of the most notoriously expensive and exclusive suburbs on the East Coast. It was meant to be his crowning achievement, a glittering monument to his supposed brilliance, featuring imported Italian marble and Olympic-sized pools. The propaganda campaign surrounding this disaster was aggressively pathetic. My parents practically turned their social media accounts into a dedicated public relations firm for my brother. They constantly posted excessively edited photos of him pointing at blueprints he clearly did not understand, wearing expensive custom-fitted hard hats, and captioning them with nauseating phrases like, "Our young business genius." It did not stop at Facebook and Instagram. Once a week, my corporate inbox would receive anonymous emails from untraceable addresses. Attached were links to highly obscure, paid-for lifestyle magazines featuring glowing, completely fabricated articles about Carter's rising real estate empire. These were articles that likely cost them thousands of dollars just to publish. They wanted so desperately to provoke my jealousy. They wanted me to sit in the dark and bitterly regret walking away. They had no idea I was sitting at a massive mahogany desk, reading their pathetic attempts at psychological warfare while calmly approving corporate budgets that eclipsed their entire net worth tenfold. But vanity is a dangerously fragile foundation for a commercial property. The glittering facade began to crack with spectacular speed, exposing the hollow incompetence underneath. Carter, in his infinite arrogance, had bypassed crucial environmental surveys to cut corners and speed up the glamorous, groundbreaking ceremony. He did not bother to realize, or simply did not care, that his massive foundation designs completely violated strict state regulations regarding underground ecological conservation zones. He was attempting to drive massive concrete pillars directly into a protected natural aquifer. The consequences were delightfully swift and entirely catastrophic. The State Environmental Protection Agency descended on his construction site like a pack of starving wolves. They immediately issued an ironclad stop work order, entirely freezing the project indefinitely. The second the government put heavy padlocks on the construction gates, the wealthy investors panicked. Smelling the overwhelming stench of a catastrophic legal liability, They pulled their funding en masse, completely abandoning the sinking ship and demanding immediate repayment. The financial shockwave hit my parents with the force of a runaway freight train. The glorious illusion they had sacrificed absolutely everything to maintain was instantly obliterated. Panic, raw and deeply humiliating, set in. To save the precious reputation of their golden son and fend off the furious, demanding creditors, they made the most desperate, foolish decisions imaginable. They fire-sold their beautiful, sprawling family home, the very house I grew up in, for pennies on the dollar just to liquidate cash quickly. When that was not nearly enough to plug the massive, bleeding hole of Carter's rapidly accumulating debts, they turned to the shadowy underbelly of private lending. They took out incredibly dangerous, unregulated black market loans with extortionate interest rates hovering around 40%. They were literally mortgaging their physical safety and their twilight years just to keep a useless, imaginary crown on my brother's head. Naturally, when the cold water finally reached their necks, they suddenly remembered the daughter they had so casually discarded. I did not get a direct phone call from my mother or father. Their pride was far too severely damaged to allow them to beg me directly. Instead, they sent their flying monkeys. Distant aunts and uncles suddenly started sending me long, manipulative messages, dropping heavy, pathetic hints. They vaguely mentioned how my parents were going through a temporary rough patch, how family must always stick together during hard times, and how it would be truly wonderful if I could offer them a temporary place to stay and some much-needed financial support to get them back on their feet. They were practically begging me to act as the comfortable safety net they had violently cut out from under me exactly 6 months ago. I read every single one of those desperate messages with a perfectly steady pulse. I did not reply. I did not block them. I simply let the messages sit there marked as read, a silent, chilling testament to my absolute indifference. I pushed my phone aside, picked up my drafting pen, and focused entirely on the massive, brilliant master plan rapidly taking shape on the desk in front of me. The inevitable collapse of a poorly structured real estate deal is a remarkably clinical process. When the final grace period expired, the commercial bank swooped in with absolute precision, foreclosing on the entire 50-acre property. Carter's grand, imaginary resort was officially dead. Seized by furious creditors and thrown into the massive, anonymous pile of distressed banking assets. It was a spectacular, humiliating failure, but in the ruthless ecosystem of corporate real estate, one man's catastrophic bankruptcy is simply another firm's prime acquisition target. Ironically, the very plot of land that buried my brother caught the sharp, predatory eye of Vanguard Horizon Associates. The location was undeniably prime, and our advanced acquisition algorithms flagged the foreclosed dirt as highly undervalued. The executive board wanted to pivot away from heavy commercial structures and develop a state-of-the-art, zero-emissions smart ecological park. The exact moment I saw the topographical maps and the familiar county zoning coordinates projected on the glowing screen during a senior strategy meeting, my blood ran completely cold for a fraction of a second. I was looking at the exact graveyard of Carter's ruined empire. I did not let the bitter irony distract me. Instead, I saw the ultimate, perfect checkmate. I knew the physical geography, the complicated local zoning politics, and the underlying environmental constraints of that specific county better than any senior partner in the entire firm. I locked myself in my private office for 72 straight hours. I consumed endless thermoses of bitter black coffee and drafted a flawlessly aggressive, bulletproof master proposal. I mapped out a revolutionary ecological infrastructure that did not fight the protected underground aquifer, but actually utilized it for sustainable geothermal cooling. I marched into the executive boardroom on Monday morning and delivered a presentation so brutally efficient and financially airtight that the board of directors did not ask a single modifying question. By the time I walked out of those heavy oak doors, I was handed complete unilateral authority as the lead negotiator to acquire the bankrupt asset on behalf of Vanguard. My first aggressive directive was to demand full, unfiltered access to the holding bank's secure digital data room. I needed to dissect every single financial autopsy report, every unpaid mechanic's lien, and every desperate promissory note Carter had signed before the total collapse. Late one night, while the rest of the city slept, I was meticulously scrolling through a buried digital folder containing the mezzanine debt stack. That was when I found it. It was a deeply buried collateral agreement, a desperately rushed, high-interest bridge loan executed just 2 weeks before the State Environmental Agency shut the project down. I leaned closer to the bright monitor, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted legal annexes to secure the final, doomed injection of capital. Carter had put up a secondary, highly irregular layer of collateral. I pulled up the final signature pages. There, printed in stark black ink, were the names of my mother and my father. They had supposedly pledged the total cash payout value of their comprehensive life insurance policies, the absolute final safety net they had left in the world after panic selling their family home. But I knew my parents. I knew the aggressive, looping way my father always crossed his letters, and the tight, nervous slant of my mother's handwriting. The signatures on this legally binding document were entirely wrong. They were stiff, unnaturally traced, and fundamentally fraudulent. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, yet my heart rate remained perfectly, chillingly steady. My brother, the golden child, the brilliant businessman they had sacrificed my graduation and their entire financial future to protect, had committed outright, undeniable felony fraud. He had forged our parents' signatures to mortgage their very lives without them having a single clue about the transaction. If the bank ever aggressively audited this specific loan trace, Carter would face serious federal prison time, and my parents would be left absolutely destitute, stripped of their insurance in their fragile old age. A lesser person might have felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to warn them, to cry, or to use this explosive information to force a tearful, dramatic family reconciliation. I felt absolutely nothing of the sort. I looked at the forged signatures glowing on the screen and saw the ultimate, crushing leverage. I transformed into an absolute, cold-blooded machine. The following Tuesday, I walked into the downtown corporate headquarters of the commercial bank, holding the foreclosed deed. I sat across the polished mahogany table from 3 sweating, exhausted senior vice presidents who were desperate to scrub this toxic, non-performing asset off their upcoming quarterly balance sheets. They tried to play hardball, opening the negotiation by demanding 80% of the original appraised value, citing the prime location and the rapid gentrification of the surrounding zip codes. I did not even blink. I opened my heavy leather briefcase and began systematically dismantling their entire negotiating position. I weaponized every single catastrophic mistake my brother had made. I slammed down the state environmental violation reports, calculating the tens of millions of dollars in mandatory soil remediation penalties the new buyer would be forced to inherit. I highlighted the severe structural flaws in the abandoned foundation that would require massive, expensive demolition. Finally, I subtly, surgically hinted at deep, highly irregular discrepancies in the collateral paperwork that could potentially drag their institution into a massive, multi-year federal fraud investigation if the deal went to a highly scrutinized public auction. I watched the arrogant color completely drain from the faces of the senior bankers. They realized with horrifying clarity that they were not negotiating. They were being held hostage by a buyer who knew their hidden vulnerabilities better than they did. I pushed a single sheet of paper across the wide table. It was a brutally low, all-cash offer, representing absolute pennies on the dollar of what the land was originally worth. Take it right now, and Vanguard assumes all the environmental and legal liabilities, saving your quarterly earnings report, I stated, my voice as hard and flat as a solid concrete slab. Reject it, and I will walk out that door. Call the state financial regulators, and let this toxic waste dump bankrupt this entire branch. They surrendered and signed the preliminary agreement in less than 20 minutes. It was a bloodless, flawlessly executed corporate slaughter. When the final acquisition documents were drawn up and stamped with the heavy red seal of the state notary a week later, I calmly reviewed the title deed. per my aggressive internal negotiations with the Vanguard Executive Board. My compensation for securing the land at such a record-breaking low price was not just a standard cash bonus. I demanded real equity. Right there, etched permanently onto the legal ownership registry, was my name, Noelle Montgomery, project director and vested minority shareholder. With a few deliberate strokes of a pen, I had legally, financially, and permanently erased every single trace of Carter's pathetic existence from that earth. The soil belonged to me now. It had been exactly 6 months. 180 days had passed since I sat shivering in that cavernous auditorium, suffocating under the weight of those 3 empty chairs. The bitter, isolating chill of that Boston afternoon was now permanently replaced by the bright, razor-sharp sunlight of a pristine morning. Today marked the official groundbreaking ceremony for Vanguard Horizon Associates' crowning achievement, the Zero-Emission Ecological Park. The atmosphere crackled with electric anticipation. Local politicians, elite investors, and the heavy hitters of the commercial real estate world were gathered, drinking expensive catered coffee and exchanging powerful handshakes. I stood alone at the very edge of the massive construction site, the fierce wind whipping the heavy hem of my tailored black coat against my legs. Behind me, stretching impossibly high into the crystal-clear sky, was an enormous, freshly erected billboard. The bold, towering letters printed on the pristine white canvas screamed my absolute, undeniable victory out to the entire world. It boldly declared, Lead Project Director Noelle Montgomery, a Vanguard Horizon Associates development. That massive structure of industrial steel and heavy vinyl stood proudly, aggressively casting a long, dark shadow directly over the pathetic, crumbling concrete foundation that Carter had abandoned. The physical weight of his monumental failure, his arrogance, and his shattered empire was quite literally buried under my name. I had claimed his graveyard as my kingdom. I turned to my newly appointed executive assistant, a sharp, highly efficient young woman holding a professional tablet. I handed her my personal phone and instructed her to take a single photograph of me standing before the towering sign. When she raised the camera, I did not smile. My face was a meticulously crafted mask of cold, impenetrable stone. My eyes, staring directly into the camera lens, were as sharp and unforgiving as freshly honed steel blades. There was no joy in this picture, only the terrifying calm of an executioner. I took the device back from her hands and stared at the captured image. It was flawlessly devastating. My thumb hovered over the screen as I navigated deep into the system settings. For 6 months, I had completely severed my digital existence from theirs. Now, it was time to open the gates. I deliberately unblocked my mother's number. I unblocked my father's number. Finally, I unblocked Carter. I scrolled down to the bottom of my messages and opened the dormant family group chat, a digital relic I had not looked at since the day they chose a hotel ballroom over my graduation. I attached the high-resolution photograph. Beneath the image, my fingers flew across the digital keyboard with zero hesitation, typing out a single, calculated sentence. Thank you for not attending my graduation. Because of that, I had enough time to buy out Carter's entire career. I pressed send. The digital bomb detonated. The profound silence I had enjoyed for half a year was violently, spectacularly shattered. For the first 2 excruciating minutes, there was absolutely nothing. I could vividly imagine the paralyzing shock freezing the blood in their veins as they stared at their screens. I pictured their brains desperately short-circuiting, entirely unable to process the impossible, terrifying reality of that billboard. Then, the onslaught began. My phone physically vibrated with such violent intensity that it began inching across the surface of the aluminum folding table next to me. The screen lit up in a manic, flashing strobe light of sheer, unadulterated panic. Incoming call from mother. Ignored. Incoming call from father. Ignored. Incoming call from Carter. Ignored. Within exactly 60 minutes, the red notification counter on my screen skyrocketed to an absurd number. There were exactly 47 missed calls. They were desperately clawing at the walls of the fortress they had forced me to build. The frantic ringing eventually stopped, instantly replaced by an unhinged avalanche of text messages. The notifications poured in like a torrential flood, vividly displaying the rapid, pathetic stages of their psychological collapse. The initial wave was pure, venomous denial. Carter texted first, his words frantic and aggressive. "What the hell is this sick joke? You cannot legally do this. I will sue you into the ground. You psychotic bitch." My mother followed mere seconds later, typing in all capital letters, "You vicious, evil little snake. How dare you humiliate your brother like this in public?" But as the cold, unforgiving reality of my corporate title and the sheer legal finality of the Vanguard acquisition began to truly sink into their minds, the tone drastically shifted. The aggressive cursing rapidly morphed into stunned disbelief, and then, inevitably, into groveling, stomach-turning despair. My father sent a massive block of text, his words practically dripping with pathetic desperation. "Noelle, please, you have to listen to us. He is your own flesh and blood. Have mercy on your family. We are begging you. Please just talk to your superiors. Please return the construction rights to him. We will lose absolutely everything." I stood perfectly still amidst the sudden, roaring sounds of heavy excavators firing up their massive diesel engines, preparing to violently tear the very last remnants of Carter's dream out of the earth. I picked up a small paper cup of bitter pitch-black espresso from the catering table. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich, dark heat burn the back of my throat. I looked down at the glowing screen, watching the endless stream of crying, begging messages illuminate the glass before the screen timed out and faded back into a black void. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel a shred of guilt. The brutal hunt had not ended with the signing of the acquisition contract. The real game was only just beginning. The inevitable, catastrophic explosion happened exactly 2 days after the groundbreaking ceremony. I was sitting at my desk, meticulously reviewing the intricate structural schematics for the geothermal cooling systems on the 48th floor, when my private desktop phone abruptly buzzed. The head of building security sounded incredibly tense, his usually calm voice tight with urgency. He informed me that 3 extremely hostile individuals were currently causing a massive disruption down in the immaculate white marble lobby of our corporate headquarters. They were violently screaming at the receptionists, wildly demanding to see the ungrateful, unfilial daughter who had allegedly stolen their precious property. They were creating an absolute spectacle, loudly threatening to call the national press and aggressively cursing my name to any passing executive who would listen. The standard security protocol for a massive corporation like Vanguard Horizon Associates was swift and merciless. Security personnel would normally physically restrain the trespassers, drag them to the service exit, and have the local police haul them away in heavy metal handcuffs. But I pressed the glowing intercom button and issued a very different, highly specific command. I instructed the head of security to stand down immediately. Let them wait in the center of the room. I stood up from my heavy mahogany desk and carefully smoothed the sharp, clean lines of my tailored, pitch-black designer suit. It felt exactly like a suit of impenetrable modern armor. I walked down the quiet hallway and took the private executive elevator straight down to the ground floor. When the polished steel doors silently parted, I saw them. They looked entirely out of place, like chaotic stains against the ultra-modern, aggressively sterile elegance of the Vanguard lobby. Carter was completely red in the face, veins popping in his neck as he aggressively pointed his finger into the chest of a massive, stoic security guard. My parents flanked him, looking frantic, disheveled, and deeply exhausted by their own desperate panic. Instead of hiding behind a wall of armed guards and having them thrown roughly onto the unforgiving concrete sidewalk, I walked directly toward the epicenter of their chaos. My heavy heels clicked rhythmically against the expensive stone floor, every step echoing through the massive atrium with terrifying, undeniable authority. When they finally noticed my approach, Carter immediately opened his mouth to scream another vicious, degrading insult, but I simply raised one single hand, slicing through the air. The gesture silenced him instantly. I did not utter a greeting. I merely gestured toward a massive, fully transparent glass conference room situated perfectly in the dead center of the main floor. I silently invited them inside. I wanted them fully exposed to the light. I wanted every single passing senior partner, financial analyst, and board member in this towering building to bear witness to their absolute, spectacular collapse. The heavy glass door sealed shut behind us with a soft hiss, completely cutting off the ambient noise of the bustling corporate hub. We were entirely sealed inside a soundproof, illuminated aquarium. Carter could not hold back for even a second. He immediately slammed both of his hands down hard onto the polished mahogany table, his voice vibrating with unchecked, venomous rage. "You deceitful, psychotic thief!" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You actually think you can just manipulate some shadowy corporate loophole and steal my land out from under me? I am going to entirely destroy you. I am going to hire the best attorneys in the city and tie you up in brutal litigation for the next 10 years. My mother immediately joined his pathetic, screeching chorus, her face twisted in a mask of righteous, misplaced fury. "You have completely lost your mind. Noel, hand over those development rights right now. You owe this to your family after everything you have put us through. We raised you." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice in defense. I did not utter a single syllable to address their pathetic, screaming tantrums. Instead, I calmly reached into my sleek leather portfolio and slowly pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I placed it squarely in the dead center of the table. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I pushed it across the highly reflective wooden surface. It slid smoothly and stopped exactly an inch away from Carter's trembling hands. Carter let out a sharp sneer, aggressively flipping the heavy cover open, clearly expecting to see a lowball financial settlement offer or a hollow legal threat. But his arrogant, furious expression instantly froze. The hot blood drained from his face so rapidly that he looked exactly like a freshly exhumed corpse. He was staring directly at the heavily audited, heavily redacted financial autopsy of his own destroyed company. My parents, deeply confused by his sudden, terrifying silence, leaned awkwardly over his broad shoulders to read the dense legal documents. I stood perfectly still and watched the exact, beautiful microsecond that the grand, magnificent illusion of their golden child completely shattered into fine, unrecoverable dust. They were looking at the high-interest, black market loan agreements, but more importantly, they were staring directly at the secondary collateral addendums printed on the final pages. Their widening eyes traced the stiff, unnatural, forged signatures pledging the total cash value of their comprehensive life insurance policies. The sheer, crushing weight of reality crashed down upon them like a collapsing concrete ceiling. Their brilliant, wildly successful son was not a tragic victim of a cruel corporate takeover. He was an incompetent, arrogant failure and a desperate, cowardly fraudster who had legally and maliciously sacrificed the lives of his own parents just to buy himself 2 extra weeks of fake glory. If these highly specific papers were ever handed over to the state district attorney, Carter would undoubtedly be facing serious, unavoidable time in a federal penitentiary, and my parents would be left completely ruined, facing severe legal consequences and absolute poverty in their final years. The silence inside the glass room became absolute, impossibly heavy, and completely suffocating. The false, unearned pride that had aggressively fueled their arrogance for my entire life evaporated into thin air. My father physically collapsed backward into a heavy leather chair, his hands desperately gripping his chest, gasping for air as if he had just been physically gutted with a hunting knife. Carter could not even bring himself to look at them. He just stared blankly at the polished table, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Then, my mother finally broke. She let out a horrific, guttural sob that tore through her throat. The proud woman who had loudly laughed while sipping champagne in a luxury ballroom while I sat entirely alone at my graduation. The woman who had left a vicious voicemail cursing me to fail miserably in life, completely unraveled. Her legs entirely gave out beneath her. She dropped heavily to her knees, pressing her trembling hands flat against the freezing, transparent glass floor of the corporate meeting room. Hot tears streamed rapidly down her face, entirely ruining her expensive makeup as she looked up at me with sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes. "Noelle," she wept bitterly, her voice cracking and begging in a pitch I had never heard before. "Noelle, please listen to me. You have the ultimate power here. You are a senior executive at this massive company. You have all the money and the corporate lawyers. Please, I am begging you to bury these documents. Save your brother from going to federal prison. Please use your resources to help us get our insurance back before we lose our lives. We will do absolutely anything you want. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Please have mercy on your own flesh and blood." I stood up slowly, adjusting the cuffs of my suit, looking down at the pathetic, broken scene playing out beneath me. My eyes were as calm, cold, and entirely still as a frozen winter lake. The fragile, desperate little girl who used to crave their validation and love was completely, permanently dead. "I am a lead architect," I replied, my voice completely flat and entirely devoid of any human emotion. "I build massive, sustainable urban infrastructure. I do not run a charity ward for incompetent criminals. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose him. You sacrificed absolutely everything for him. Now, I highly suggest you go home and bear the massive weight of his greatness together." I turned my back on them. I did not look back for a single second, even as my mother's desperate, echoing wails amplified behind the thick glass panels. I raised my hand slightly and caught the eye of the head of security, who was waiting patiently just outside the perimeter. I gave him one single, definitive nod. I watched his highly trained team move in quickly to physically escort the 3 crying strangers out of my building, permanently removing them from my reality forever. I stepped back into the quiet sanctuary of the private elevator and rode it all the way up to the very top floor. I walked back into my corner office and stood silently before the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I looked out over the sprawling, historic city of Boston. The bright morning sun was powerfully reflecting off the towering skyscrapers, casting a brilliant, blinding light over the vast urban landscape that I was now actively reshaping. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the cool, perfectly conditioned air fill my lungs completely. For the absolute first time in my 26 years of life, the heavy, suffocating ghost of those 3 empty chairs was completely gone. The phantom weight of their endless expectations, their lies, and their cruelty had vanished into the wind. I realized in that quiet, fiercely triumphant moment that I was not just redesigning a commercial district. I had taken a massive wrecking ball to my own painful past, completely demolished the toxic foundation I was born into, and painstakingly designed a brand new, magnificent life entirely on my own terms. Thank you so much for listening to the conclusion of my story today. Where in the world are you tuning in from? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's journey compelling and enjoyed the story, please consider supporting our channel. A contribution of just $1 makes a massive difference for us. It allows our dedicated staff to afford their living expenses, help feed their families, and keep producing the high-quality stories you love to hear. You can easily support us by scanning the donation QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the link provided in the description box and the pinned comment. We appreciate you more than words can say.